Disclaimer.
I don't know how to start this. We had like an intro the last time, but that was years
Well,
ago.
that's the thing. We can just start recording and getting the content, and then once we figure out, what it's gonna shape into, then we can worry about the aesthetics of it.
Perfect. Because I spent a year making videos in the past, and I don't want to edit all day long.
Right. And that's the thing, like a majority of what we got, like my husband does very minimal editing when he does his podcast and stuff too. But like you said, it's like if there's like a pause in a conversation or just edit just small things, but not the meat of the conversation.
Right. Yeah, we can always edit these first few minutes.
Yeah. But yes, we were talking about the myth of probiotics.
Yeah, well, let's talk about probiotics. Let's talk about what people think are probiotics first.
Right. Okay.
People think that sources of probiotics are going to be things like yogurt or kefir, however you want to pronounce it, sauerkraut, kimchi. These are all kombucha, vinegar, even because kombucha is only half a step away from vinegar. So
Right.
let's think about what are these things? These are vegetables in the case of sauerkraut and kimchi, or dairy products like a milk, which would be yogurt and kefir. Kombucha is a lot of different things. Kombucha can be a lot of different things. But either way, what we're having is we have a bacteria or multiple bacterias that are feeding on a calorie source, whether the calorie source is carbohydrates, which would be the case of the cabbage, or a fat and carbohydrate source, which would be dairy, because dairy is both sugars and fats. It's a lot more fat in dairy compared to a cabbage. There's trace amounts of fat. But the bottom line is we have bacteria feeding on this food source, and they're just living their lives.
Mm-hmm.
If you leave these foods long enough in an uncontrolled state of being eaten by these bacteria, you have food that is rotting. My roommate doesn't like going to Korea because he says when you go around in the neighborhoods in Korea, everywhere it smells like rotting cabbage. Those are his words. That's everybody. They dig a little hole in their backyard and they put the cabbage in there, and they have a controlled rotting process, which we call fermentation. And that's what makes the kimchi. And they have a similar process in Germany for sauerkraut. But you can do it with pickles too. I mean, in America, we just call them pickles, but most places in the world, they call them pickled cucumbers. But you can do that with anything. What's happening here is you have vinegar, which is acetic acid, which is the product made by the mother. The mother is that like weird bacterial fungal patty that forms at the top of homemade vinegars or homemade kombucha.
The
SCOBY. That's the other word for, yeah. Yeah, if you leave it long enough, it's literally just rotting. And we're eating food that's on a controlled rot, and the presumption is that that bacteria is also good for us. So that's a probiotic. Look at the word along all by itself. Biotic would be like bacteria, bio meaning life. So little life organisms, pro, so beneficial to life. That's a presumption. We don't really know if these bacteria in this food is for our lives. Because we also have this idea of we want probiotics, we don't want bad bacteria. Because bad bacteria that takes over our intestinal tract we would call that SIBO, small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. And then you have all sorts of digestive issues when you have the bad bacteria. So the real question I would ask is, do we know the difference looking at the genetics, for what limited genetics we know so far of bacteria? Do we know which ones are actually pro and which ones are actually anti our lives? Because when we get into words, right, like every bacteria is pro its life. They're all probiotic for itself. But how do I know that this bacteria is pro for me?
Bacteria lives matter.
I'm just for BLM.
They're like, we already had the website and the logo made. We just changed the subject matter.
So the presumption is that these bacteria that ferment food, that eat foods, these are also going to be good for us. And we have this leading widespread theory that your microbiome, which is the biome, meaning like the little circle of life that's in the circle that is your stomach, micro because it's small. We're not talking about the world on a whole. We want to have a healthy microbiome in our gut because it promotes good digestion, and good digestion promotes overall health. If you're eating food and you're not absorbing the nutrients, what good is the food in the first place? So the bacteria in our food, or the bacteria in our gut, assist us in this digestion process. It's not just our bile and stomach acid working all by itself in order to absorb the nutrients. We literally have a symbiotic relationship with this bacteria. We feed the bacteria, and the bacteria's byproducts help to feed us. If we have the wrong bacteria in us, those byproducts harm us. So that's pretty straightforward. So we have probiotics. Then we mentioned earlier, you weren't sure what prebiotics are. Prebiotics, the concept of prebiotics is the precursor to having a healthy microbiome. And I think that the concept of prebiotics is really confusing because it's an indication that science doesn't really understand what's going on inside of our gut. I like to point to that old so-called Native American story where they're like, there are two wolves inside of you, a good wolf and a bad wolf. And
Yeah.
depending on the one that you feed will be the how your life pans out. Whatever. I'm going to modify that myth a little bit. You have two categories of bacteria inside of you, the good bacteria and the bad bacteria, the good wolf and the bad wolf. And depending on what you feed yourself, you're going to promote the growth and life of the healthy bacteria or the bad bacteria. This is the concept behind prebiotics adjusted. So if you eat foods that are bad for you, and we can say pretty comfortably that high processed or ultra processed foods are going to be bad for you, we can pretty comfortably say that eating foods that are mostly manufactured chemicals loaded with artificial dyes and things like that kind of stuff is not good for you directly, but that stuff needs to be broken down. What's going to break it down? Bacteria. And so if you're putting in bad things, well, we have that old saying, garbage in, garbage out. You put bad things into your system, it's going to feed bacteria that can handle processing bad stuff. And so the byproduct, which is basically a fancy way of saying feces, the waste of the waste of this bacteria that can handle the bad stuff is also going to be bad. But if you're eating nice things like whole fruits and vegetables, ideally from your own garden, but let's be realistic, we don't all have the time, the space, or even the green thumb for doing that. If you're eating whole fruits and vegetables, those are going to be promoting the good bacteria, because the bad bacteria eats bad things and the good bacteria eats good things. So the concept of prebiotics is that if you eat certain foods, it's going to promote the good bacteria. Well, why is the list of prebiotics so short? The list of prebiotics should actually be all whole fruits and vegetables and certain herbal extracts. When I say certain herbal extracts, I do mean pretty much most herbal extracts, but just not the point where you've killed, if you overcook something, you kind of ruin its nutritional quality because you've overcooked it. You've denatured everything inside of it. But that's getting a little technical.
Mhm.
So pretty much most food is a prebiotic. You could go online and Google what is a prebiotic, and it'll probably show you certain herbs and certain roots, but it won't tell you all the foods. Other prebiotics, yeah, that's prebiotics.
Mhm.
Anything and everything you eat will promote the growth of certain bacteria. Bacteria is a really interesting thing because you can be in a room that you think is sterile, and if you leave something there long enough, a piece of food, bacteria just starts to grow. Mold just starts to grow. It's just stuff in our air. There's this old concept of spontaneous generation. It was accepted for a long time in science, and that was before we figured out that things gave birth. There was this concept that maggots just magically appeared on steak. And then we realized that with this jar experiment, that flies lay eggs that give birth to maggots. Spontaneous generation presumed that frogs just magically appeared out of ponds, but no, they lay eggs and then the tadpoles and then they turn into frogs. But there's just so much floating in our air that it is almost like spontaneous generation of many molds and bacteria and potentially even viruses. You have to have an extremely controlled, sterile environment that we can create in laboratories where we experiment on these things to keep these things out. But they're everywhere. They're all over
Mhm.
the place. They're already on our food. They're already in our food. It's everywhere. So we don't need to
Yeah, and I
go ahead.
no, I was just saying that it just makes sense with food prep why it's also so paramount. Also, it's like, you know, you're not so much like you're just counteracting for what could be exposed to, you if you don't take those parameters. Like you could have healthy things, especially now, pesticides and everything. It's like you kind of have to wash your food and be more careful about where you're getting things just because of that now. And because of how toxic our environment has become, it's like now we have to protect ourselves and be more proactive against it even more now. You can't just always get something from the grocery store and just eat it right away. I mean, you can, but you get all these recalls because of there being contamination somewhere along the line, regardless of how pristine the environment is. Like you said, it could be a sterile room and there can still be a breeding ground for something.
Yeah, those contaminations that we get from packaged foods in the grocery stores, that is blatant neglect and just poor management of the factories where they're bagging these foods.
Mm.
You could have the same issue at home. Let's say you're using you have one cutting board and you're chopping up your chicken and you left some of the juice from your chicken on the cutting board, and then later on you were chopping up the lettuce so that you could have some salad, and it accidentally touched that juice left over from the chicken. You hadn't washed it off the cutting board properly. You could probably get salmonella later on when you have dinner that night with your salad with chicken on the side. Yeah, the chicken on the side was cooked properly, but the lettuce accidentally touched that juice. And it's not even so much like you touch the juice right away. And if the chicken was properly stored in the fridge, the salmonella might not necessarily be active. but it sat in a bowl, the lettuce, with a little bit of that chicken juice for an hour, let's say, while you were finishing preparation and cooking. And in that hour at room temperature, the bacteria has been allowed to grow and proliferate. So, I mean, you've worked in the food industry before. You know that there are rules about how long you can leave certain things out at room temperature. This type of food needs to be put in the refrigerator or the freezer after a certain amount of time. This kind of food is not permitted to be above a certain temperature for more than a certain amount of time. Otherwise, you have to completely throw it away.
Right.
It's because the bacteria that digests that is already there.
Mm.
So
Oh, see, that makes more sense.
it's already there. You don't need to go looking for bacteria to help you break down the food. It's already there. Except, like what you said, with pesticides. Pesticides and herbicides and fungicides. We're sterilizing our food that gets grown in factory farms. And so it makes it harder for us to get the right bacteria. Plus, those toxins, aside, pesticide, fungicide, whatever, all of those poisons that are sprayed on our food, that goes into our food through the root system as they spray around the roots to prevent the growth of weeds, many weeds of which are medicinal. But a little jab there. Now we have to have these poisons in our body, and there's going to be bacteria that try to break down those poisons, because that's all the circle of life is about breaking things down so that they can keep cycling through the network. So you have, let's say cabbage, because I was picking on cabbage earlier. You have a cabbage from a factory farm. That cabbage naturally has bacteria growing on it, on the outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
We call those elevated biotics. Why are they elevated? Because they're above ground. They're not in the ground. They're not in fermented foods. They're living on the outside, on the above ground parts of a plant.
I thought it was like because we're better.
No, it has to do with location.
We're the better probiotics.
Well, you can't buy elevated biotics. You can't buy a pill capsule full of elevated biotics, but you can buy elevated biotics in the sense that you can go to hopefully a reputable farmer's market and purchase organically grown foods, and they will be covered in these biotics, and they will be elevated because this is the above ground portion of the food. You cannot get an elevated biotic on a potato. Let's just make that clear.
Right.
Because a potato grows underground. You can't get an elevated biotic on the tuber part, the underground part of a radish. But if you're eating the radish greens, the greens will have elevated biotics because they're the above ground part.
Right.
Okay. So you can buy elevated biotics, but you can't buy elevated biotics. You've got to
They're like a
buy.
byproduct. You're buying them, but you don't know you're buying them.
Right. Exactly. So if you buy a cabbage that has been sprayed, there are elevated biotics on the cabbage, but they're not going to be in the same number because it's been sprayed with certain pesticides and herbicides. And then you need to wash it because you need to remove as much of those pesticides as you possibly can, because it's just more of a toxin load for your body to deal with. And you're never going to get rid of them all.
Right.
It's not possible because they spray the ground with herbicides and fungicides as well. And that's going to get absorbed by the plant through its root system. So no matter what you do, you're going to get some. And those toxins are going to feed the bad bacteria in your system. But the cabbage itself will feed the good bacteria in your system. Where do you get that bacteria? From the cabbage. You don't go out and find it.
Mm-hmm.
For example, another example, let's say you're eating yogurt. That bacteria eats dairy. That dairy bacteria isn't necessarily going to help you digest cabbage.
Right.
It's
It
not
needs to
necessarily
break
going to
down the
help you
dairy.
digest. Right. Exactly. I, I mentioned to you earlier how we're not vultures. You know, vultures have some of the strongest stomach acid in the animal kingdom because they eat rotten things. They can handle
Yeah.
those kinds of bacteria. They have very strong stomach acid. And look at how the population at large is. A lot of them have acid reflux, GERD. There's a lot of people out there taking HCl, hydrochloric acid supplementation, because they don't have strong stomach acid. Why might you not have strong stomach acid? Maybe it's because people are eating things that degrade their stomach acid. If you need strong stomach acid to digest something like meat, because you do need strong stomach acid to digest meat, animals like our pet dogs and cats have stronger stomach acid than we do because they can handle raw meat. You leave a piece of fresh cut meat on the countertop and it will get moldy very quickly. If you leave a cabbage
Mm-hmm.
on the countertop, does it get moldy? It
It
wilts.
will, but it'll be months.
Right. It'll dry out first. It'll wilt. You really have to prepare meat properly and like set it in the sun and it'll turn into jerky rather than molding. But there's a lot of preparation that goes behind taking meat to turn it into jerky so that it doesn't get
Yeah.
moldy, as opposed to cabbage. You just set cabbage on the counter and it'll be fine for quite some time. So
Mm-hmm.
the strength of the stomach acid needs to increase in order to digest things that are going to rot more rapidly. And we don't have that strength. And if you eat things that require stronger stomach acid all the time, you're putting a strain on the glands within your body that produce that acid. Let's say you're at work and you naturally have the capacity to work, let's say 7 hours a day, but your job is demanding that you work 16 hours every day. What's the quality of your work going to look like?
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what we're doing to our bodies. Our bodies are like, I can produce tip top, optimal strength stomach acid 7 hours a day, but we keep putting these demands on our body by eating these strong acid requiring foods, and we're wearing out our stomach glands. And the result is people have bacterial overgrowth that are unproductive. They have GERD, they have acid reflux, and they're like, my stomach acid is too strong. It's burning the back of my throat. I don't think that's what's happening.
It just sounds like that is just a lot of the issues that we suffer in America. I mean, in the world, but mostly majority in our country is just like an overstimulation of the systems that are out of balance because you hear a lot of people who have nervous system overload or your endocrine system is being bombarded. um just basically a lot of weight on the systems and things that don't really allow for things to be working properly because they're being overworked and exhausted. Especially, with the high caffeine that people drink. It's not like we're in Italy, where you have your espresso a couple times throughout the day or whatever, or in the morning or at specific times. So it's like, people are drinking like 4 or 5 cups of coffee every day, back to back. So it's like that's also wearing out our systems in another way too. So it's just like normalcy of how the sad diet has really caused us more harm and wear and tear. Like it's like high octane everything. You got a Formula One car, but you're driving it to the supermarket. It's
Yeah,
like
I
it's like
think
that's kind of a lot.
I think it's good that we focus on America since that's where we live. But I
Right.
think that it is important to mention that other countries, while they don't have as exaggerated rates of issues that we have here, they're also struggling. It does have a lot to do with American influence. I mean, if there's one culture that I would like to look at momentarily, it would be that of Okinawa, which I know a lot of people will say, "Oh, that's part of Japan." But they have a very different culture traditionally than main island Japan. Their diet consisted of 70% sweet potato, 11% fish, and we're just going to leave the remaining, what is that, 18% as miscellaneous foods. And they had the highest rate
Right.
of centurions. And a lot of my friends will say,
Hmm.
I don't want to live to 100 years. The reason you don't want to live to 100 years is because you have this modern idea that when you get to a certain age, you can't do anything because you're so old and decrepit. But that wasn't the case. The case was that you could be 100 and still very active and still moving around and still very self supportive. Although we didn't have
Hmm.
society like, they lived in communities where they were a little bit more family unit oriented. But still, the idea that you're going to get to 100 and you're going to be stuck in bed and you can't move very much and you can't feed yourself and you can't go to the bathroom on your own, that is not what those people were like. They could
Hmm.
take care of themselves. Living to 100 and being able to still harvest the sweet potatoes from the garden and carry a sack of potatoes to the house so that they could be boiled and mashed and whatever, that was commonplace. Today's day and age, where you're in your 70s and you're wheelchair bound and you need help going to the bathroom and you need help being fed, that is because people's organs aren't functioning properly because they haven't been digesting their nutrients correctly and they haven't been able to move out the waste properly.
And it's just unfortunate that that's just that, the biggest market that runs this country is illness. Like it's not about, there's no business when it comes to health. You look at all these other countries and stuff, they have universal health care for their citizens. They encourage communities, they encourage longevity. In this country, unfortunately, we throw our elderly into homes, away assisted living places and things. We don't maintain connection with our elders. We don't try to, like lifestyle or anything health wise is monetized and sensationalized. And there's this thing that is associated with luxury. For you to be healthy, you got to be rich. If you're going to be healthy, you got to have a lot of money because you can't afford to just take care of yourself. And then also work ethic. It's like, these people are workers. Like they're either they're doing physical labor most of the time. Either especially in the side, you're getting your water, you're tilling and farming your vegetables, you have things and chores around the house that you're taking care of. Like it's just quality of life kind of things. It's like your quality of life focus is about living versus having life more easy. Yeah, it's been a detachment for glorious if you are a person but not recreation activity, like not going to, like, and that's kind of like, person to do, you know, but every day because they gotta live every day. Unfortunately for us, we'll always getting.
Uh-oh. You were choppy there and now your video feed has dropped. Ah,
Connected.
your video feed is back.
Hold on. So, anyways.
I'd like to summarize what I think you were hinting at. What I think you were hinting at is there's an infection of greed within our society. People
Yes.
want, and I don't even know if I will call it laziness, because because the things that they are doing, even though it seems like they're lazy because they're not doing the work, they're doing a lot of work to steal from others. They are not lazy in the sense of their crimes. They're constantly stealing the labor of others. They're not reciprocating to the people who are doing the work in a fair manner. So they're greedy. They want all of this time to do something other than what's actually healthy and promoting the life and well-being of all the different levels, the earth, the plants themselves. They just want to sit around like kings and queens on their throne, telling other people what to do and reaping the benefits of all the hard work, of all the bounteousness of the earth and of people themselves. It's very greedy. And to go back to the Okinawa example, all it took was the opening of a handful of, literally like 5 or 6 fast food restaurants. And Okinawa now is like a lot of the Pacific Islands, where they have extreme obesity and heart heart issues, diabetes, all of these problems, because they're not eating like their ancestors used to eat. They eat in this manner that they have been introduced to. And a lot of these fast food restaurants, they originated from here in the US. So circling back to the US. But yeah, I wanted to touch on them because they are often, the traditional Okinawan diet is often looked at as like peak. Where do you want to be if you want to live independently and as healthily as long as possible? You want to model yourself after the traditional Okinawan diet. And
Yeah,
it's
and
not
it
even
just
got a
makes
lot of
sense
elevated
also.
it's not even got a lot of elevated biotics, because you're not getting elevated biotics on the sweet potato. It's
Right.
underground.
Oh man, Japanese sweet potatoes are so delicious too. Oh my god, they're so good. But it's just funny that again, like there's this monetary greed that's been developed because true wealth is your health.
Yeah.
If you don't have your health, you don't have anything. So I can imagine that people who weren't very healthy, weren't very physically well, but imagine how like again like you feel like you have some sense of power, some sense of like something because you feel like you have money. Unfortunately, we find out again that's like the trail that leads nowhere, the pot of gold at the end of the proverbial rainbow, that eventually when you get there you're still sick because money can't buy you well-being.
Nope.
So that's just a thing that's been sold and continuously bought over and over again, but made a select group of people rich just because, again, like if you don't have any hope and you feel like, you're dying, what can you do instead? But that's also the sad thing is that, instead it shouldn't be a hopeless thing. Like there's answers, there's ways for you to heal yourself. But people, when they get sick, they end up becoming nihilist or feel like they don't have any hope and they have to rely on something outside of themselves to save them. Not saying that there isn't a higher power or there isn't some kind of divine aspect that can also be an assistance, but just the fact that unfortunately people don't feel empowered when they are sick. People just accept their sickness and they take it as a chronic issue. They get prescriptions for things. They go see a doctor that's not really trying to make them better. And all the information again about healing yourself and how to reverse these things is kept in the dark or not talked about because again, it's not profitable.
Right. We're veering a little bit off topic, but I just have a small story to share that I'm really excited about. I have a friend, now client, that I'm working with, and she is dirt poor. She is so ill, chronically ill, that she can't work, and she has a fiance and he works, but she also has two kids, one of which especially is special needs. He's autistic. And so they're on food stamps, and they claim that they can't afford to buy certain foods. So how am I supposed to help somebody who can't afford to get certain things to be able to heal? Well, this is what I really enjoy doing with the herbs and the plants is, I really tried to get her on the herbal extraction called celery juice, and yet she just couldn't carve out the budget for one bunch of celery every single day. And I mean, to me, that seems crazy that you can't set aside 50 cents to $1 a day for a bunch of celery. But I also don't have children. So I don't know. I just have to accept.
It's also priority, unfortunately. It's a
I get
mindset
that.
too.
I have to accept where the patient is at, the client is at. But you know what else?
Yeah.
We're in a place here in the Las Vegas Valley where just up there in those mountains, there are manzanita bushes. So one of the specific issues that this friend and client of mine has is, according to her, this is according to her and her doctor, she's had a kidney infection, ongoing kidney infection for 3 years. And they've given her different rounds of antibiotics. They've given her different rounds of medications to try to make it better. And it's not making it better. But we have a plant called the manzanita bush growing in the Spring Mountains, and it's in the cranberry and blueberry family. And while the berries themselves haven't been studied and aren't known to have medicinal properties, the leaves are known to have medicinal properties for kidney infection and bladder infection and things like that. And all that's going to take is just a little bit of my time to go up into the mountains that I'm going to go up in anyway and harvest those leaves and then dry them out on the rack and provide them. We have medicine for free, but people don't realize that. And those leaves,
well, the knowledge has been lost too. The practices and the culture that
they're trying to. I saw a video on TikTok the other day by a well-known forager from the Midwest. His name is Sam Thayer, I believe, and he was commenting about how the city and county that he lives in was spraying all by the roadways and killing off all of these native plants that are edible, and how they instead promote Kentucky bluegrass, which is which is grass. I guess it's kind of pretty, but it has no medicinal, no food value. And yeah, there's all sorts of flowers and plants and things that grow for free.
Well, with like Roundup and stuff, when you're a kid, you grow up seeing the weed commercials of them getting rid of dandelions. And dandelion root itself is so powerful. Dandelion leaf is so powerful.
The whole
so
plant.
It's like the whole thing is so good for you. And the fact that they have demonized the plant. This is a weed in your garden that you don't want to have. Like whenever I see dandelion growing up, like I get so excited because I'm like, there's medicine growing and they get big, and I know the root's gonna be big. So it's just like, like we have essentially what we would call a weedy backyard, but it's just a bunch of different plants and flowers that grow up, wildflowers, clover. We got violets. Good for reproductive health in women, and it's just a bunch of stuff. It's just funny. Like forgot what the saying really exactly is, but when there's a time of crisis or things get down, it's like go and pick your weeds because that's the medicine for the time.
Well, knowledge is power is another really good saying, and they're
Mm-hmm.
spewing off information in their advertisements that cut us off from knowledge and make us powerless. And the same
Mm-hmm.
companies that make the herbicides, Bayer, are the same companies that make the medication, Bayer aspirin. So they're cutting us off from the knowledge of how to go and find the plants that can heal us. And then they turn around and provide us with this manufactured thing. Aspirin was originally sourced from willow trees. The willow trees
Yeah.
all around Red Rock are in full bloom. They're absolutely gorgeous. All you need to do is go get the back of your knife blade and scrape the bark off, grind it up, and then, not my favorite way, but it's a very universal folk method of extraction. Get yourself some alcohol, high quality concentrated alcohol, not your usual 80 proof. It should be at least 50%. And let it soak in the alcohol. You don't need that much. I would rather not use alcohol because I know what alcohol also does. But if that's what you have, it works. Or don't even soak it in the alcohol. Scrape off the bark and make a tea out of it.
Yeah, the tea is really the best way to do anything. I mean, now it makes sense also why those cultures in Japan and Asiatic cultures drink tea. You know, a
Well,
lot of it was herbal tea. You know,
you know,
just another level of
the problem is that certain things aren't in season available year round. Like right now we're at the tail end of the spring growth for the yerba santa plant, which is Eriodictyum augustifolium, and that's a very powerful decongestant. It's really strong plant that helps with sinus issues and circulation issues, but you want the fresh growth. You want the soft, light green, tender spring growth. You don't want last year's growth. You don't want the dark green, older leaves. And so what are you going to do? You're going to drink the tea for the 2 weeks while it's available. What happens 6 months later when you're sick? So there is a benefit to alcohol if that's all you have, because making glycerin extractions is not as readily available to the common man.
well, also drying methods and stuff. I mean, it just goes back to another. It just kind of circles back around to what we were talking about earlier with probiotics and fermented food. Drying is another way of preserving things in a time when it was necessary. It's like that's a thing. Like people, it's like people take things out of context and try to apply it to their situation that may not make sense of the situation anymore, and they're using things to justify their actions. Like I remember the last time we were talking, you said people love to hear good news about bad habits. You
Yes,
know, people
they
are like,
do.
oh, so this has been good for me the whole time. Yes, just got by, like, they don't want people don't want to be held accountable, myself included. I have issues with it too, but accountability is a hard thing to take, especially when it comes to your own health, because now it's like, okay, you have to take responsibility for you not having the best quality of life. Like people like to always blame circumstances on why they're not the best version of themselves, why we're not the best version of ourselves. And it's hard, like, honestly, like, again, like you said, to someone who really cares about their health, sacrificing 50 cents to $1 towards a stalk of celery, a bunch of celery for a day, like setting aside a budget for you to be able to do what you need to do to feel better. To someone who doesn't prioritize their health and prioritizes all these other things because unfortunately our society has made it that way. It's just, something that's so simple to give you all this other stuff later, and could probably, if you fix that one issue of your life, all these other things around it will fix themselves. But again, something as simple as that seems so impossible. Like, just the idea that it's up to you is just so unfathomable.
Yeah, yeah. I want to state that when you, with this particular client, when you're as ill as this person, you don't necessarily have, and you know, I appreciate the side that you're coming at, but I also want to give compassion to the people who might be in my client's shoes, where she is putting so much energy of her energy and chi into staying alive that she doesn't have the necessary will to enforce within her family what she really needs, because she would have to apply willful pressure on the one who's actually going and buying the food. And the one who's actually going and buying the food, while they realize that she needs to get better, they aren't necessarily of the same mindset as she is or as you and I are. And they're like, we're just going to buy cereal. We're just going to buy bags and bags of enriched wheat pasta. And because it's cheap, they're trying to make those food stamps really stretch and last the entire month. And so the approach that I'm taking with her, which is an approach that I would encourage for others, because Google's free. I mean, you can go to Google, even though we know that it's just one giant data collection system. You can go to Google, you can go to DuckDuckGo, you can go to these places and look up things for free. You can download apps for free that help you with plant identification. But like you said, people don't want to take the responsibility and the accountability and the time to do the research to find out what plants you can and can't use. That's what I'm here for. But we can go and get the plant for free. At least I can. She doesn't have the energy to barely walk across the house, so she can't. But I can go and get the plant for free. I'm going to be in the mountains anyway. It doesn't take much out of me personally to be able to go get these leaves for her. But I
Well, then
told
that's
her, I
just.
said that to go with the accountability side, I can get you these leaves for free. They grow wild, they are free. I'm going to be in the mountains anyway. But you, as the patient, can you commit to having a cup of tea every day? Because if you can't even commit to having a cup of tea from the leaves that I can get from the mountains for free, then I need to stop. I can't help you.
Yeah.
I can't do the work for you. I can get you the free leaves, and hopefully these leaves will help, this tea will help her strengthen enough that she can start exerting more of her will so that she can do more. And if
Well,
she
I
can do more, then she can start doing things like the celery. She can start upgrading the quality of the food that she is feeding the family.
and that was the point that I was just getting across, is that at the end of the day, we have to be the ones who do it. You know, it's sometimes the answer is so simple, but it's also the hardest thing to do. You know, the truth at the end of the day is the truth, and it's not going to be sugar coated. It's going to be hard, and it's going to be something that is going to be a challenge, which is why that's what it is. Because like the best thing for you isn't always the easiest thing for you, and there's just so many layers when it comes to moving into a place of doing what's best for you. It challenges you physically, it challenges you emotionally, it challenges your social standing with other people, because again, when you do things that are good for you doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be best for everybody else, especially when it comes to, if you don't, if you aren't surrounded by people who are in it for your best health either. Like you're saying, like you're faced with things in your life and the people around you are a big part of that too. Like if you change your whole lifestyle around and the people around you don't support you, that makes it even harder for yourself because you're alone in it. So unless
Right.
if you're really convicted in your own self benefit, then sometimes it makes it even more impossible to do what's best for you because you just don't have a support system. So definitely it's great that you're where you are and that you're available to be a support system for someone who's advocating for their well-being, and giving them an opportunity, because hopefully she really does want to get well and she will take advantage of the opportunities that you're presenting her. I just think that just anybody, we need to have people that are surrounding us that are rooting for our best, outcome, instead of, always
All these
taking,
companies.
yeah. So I think that's why community is so important. So it's good that, we have friends and people around us outside of you know, what's influencing us on Instagram, or that isn't a personal relationship. Personal relationships are so important. So it's good that she has you.
You made me think of some of those baby formula companies. Do you know what
Oh
they
my
would
God.
do? They would go into the hospitals and offer free samples. And so then the mom would give the newborn baby the free samples of formula. And they would give the mom just enough formula so that she wasn't making enough milk herself anymore by the time the formula ran out. And they're like, oh, well, yeah, that was your free trial. If you want more formula, now you have to buy it.
It
So,
just kills me. It just kills me. It's just so sick.
yeah.
Like really, like you're, because at the end of the day, regardless of whatever the angle is, it's always to get the babies, it's to get to the children, and especially being a mom, it's like it just becomes so much more like obvious that the world is out to get your kids, your children. You know, like hide your kids, hide your wife, because you know the odds are set against you. You know, of course, this is
It only takes a
individuals,
couple
but if you
generations for knowledge to be lost. And that's why they
exactly.
start with the kid.
So it's just, and that's the thing, but it's just like, again, just like, what's the most innocent baby? Like a baby is fresh, it's new, it's the baby is potential, you know, and it
And they're
just makes me.
naive. That's also why they go after the babies, because they're
Well, they
naive.
don't know. How are they gonna know? They're just a baby. Well, my baby. I'm sorry, but yeah, yeah. It just makes my heart hurt. Just again, like, you know, when you give birth to a child, it just opens you up to all the other children that are out there, or all the other innocence that's out in the world that just gets taken advantage of. And just not only like, of course, with the child, but just in general, just how much is lost, unfortunately. You know, and it just makes you sad, because it's like everybody deserves a chance, you know, and we should even give the life that is any new life always deserves a chance. So, but I just think it also just gives it, if we are, that there's this, why there's this agenda to desensitize us to family and to communities, because innately we understand that, and we would prioritize that, you know. So again, I just think it just has to come back to just being compassionate and just finding compassion for ourselves and for others. But that's just on such a bigger thing, you know, like listening to the medical medium, even when we were talking about that, like there's just so much stacked against the good.
Right. Yeah.
So
I mean, I don't know that it's even, when you said something earlier about how um about people are looking outside of themselves to blame why they're not their best self. And there's there's two sides to that, because what you said is absolutely true. People need to take responsibility, even if you're not to blame for the cause. You might not be responsible for pushing the vase over and shattering the vase, but you might be responsible for cleaning up that.
mm,
So you're still responsible for the broken vase. You're not necessarily to blame. And
right,
you
that
can
you're right.
you can adequately say that because of all the spraying and because of all the poisons and toxins that are being put into our world, you can accurately say, I am not to blame for the reason why I have poison in myself, but I am responsible for the poison, in the sense that if I don't respond, the root word of responsible, if I don't respond to this, no one's going to respond to it for me. You go to the best doctors, you go get light therapy, you go get whatever vibrational therapy, you go have surgery, and or whatever kind of of healing modality you choose, you're the one healing. Your body is healing. Your body is the one accepting the treatment. It has to stitch its cells back up together, so to speak, no matter what kind of modality you've chosen. Nobody can fix your body for you. They can make a space, make an environment to promote the fastest, most rapid healing, but it's still down to your body. And if your body is ready to move on, like you said, it doesn't matter how much money you have for the best treatment. When your body's ready to go, that's it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Ay. It's just interesting. I've come to a place of really, I mean, I feel like I've always kind of been in this place, but I've just always known that, again, like the physical aspect is never the end result. This isn't the end, you know? So when you see people trying to live forever, or, you know, going through all of these great lengths to sacrifice the now for a future that may not be even for them, that's when it's just really like there is a level of disassociation and delusion, just because, again, like we're sacrificing our future
Yeah.
for a present that doesn't even need to be here anymore, you know? Like we have it's like your time is up. There's a season for everything, and there are players that still want to play when the street lights have come on and it's time to come home.
Yeah. So let's bring it back to the original topic about prebiotics, probiotics, and this talk about fermented foods being the dominant source of accepted probiotics. So prebiotics are your whole fruits and vegetables, and even your herbal extractions can be prebiotics, because this is the food that feeds the good bacteria. That's it. We're just going to simplify what is a prebiotic. A prebiotic is the food that feeds the good bacteria. It is accepted and understood that if food sits in your digestive tract for too long, it starts to rot. We don't want food sitting in your digestive tract for longer than necessary. I heard a friend's wife tell me one time that it's good that it takes her a really long time to digest because her body's really absorbing all the nutrients. And I'm like, that's not how that works. Just because you've eaten something doesn't stop it from rotting unless you have a strong enough bile like a vulture. But unfortunately, we're not vultures, if you can even say unfortunately. but from that perspective, we don't have battery acid like stomach acid like a vulture does. You actually have to be careful around vultures. They you know they do weird things. They like defecate on their own feet, and it helps anyway. It helps prevent certain growths on their feet because they're constantly walking in rotting flesh. And
See,
so,
it's like it seems like, I mean, I had a profound understanding with the small mushroom trip I've had by myself. It was a 2 gram trip, but the main message that I got, one of the main messages I got from that was that everybody has a role. Just play yours, because there's bigger fish to fry and you don't necessarily want that job. So just do what you can. We're all in this together. You know, we don't need you to try to do shit above your pay grade, okay? You know, it's like, you know, there's in situations like that, you're given the tools necessary for the job that you're given. Now, again, that's very necessary for that vulture because, again, they're eating rotting, dead things. So they need to be able to process that. They're gifted with something that's not going to take them out for the job that they've been getting, which is a pretty nasty job. I mean, it's a noble job. I mean, who else is going to take out the trash for us in that sense? So, yeah, they got some pretty heavy duty gear, you know? But again, it's just like, you know, we just have to find what our lane is, like, unfortunately, we're not always working in our purpose because there's like this plateau of a lifestyle that people have, and it's all trying to be the same and trying to look like the same and trying to be the same as everything that we're being shown. So people aren't able to take their unique aspects of how their life's supposed to be that fits them in a way that's copacetic to their purpose. So it's just like, but also not looking at the vulture and thinking that it's less than, or, you know, not something that's good because it has that job. It's like, again, the hardest jobs we're that we see are, you don't want that job.
So let's put fermented foods in their place, because they
Yes.
have a place, just like you said, they have a role, like the vulture has its role. Their role was, I'm living in a place that's cold, because the most popular places for fermented foods were further away from the equator, where you don't have fresh fruits and vegetables year round. Because the closer you live to the equator, the more readily accessible fruits and vegetables are year round. I was talking with somebody, uh, who the heck was I talking to about? Oh, my tour guests are from Florida. And yesterday we were lamenting about how there are no longer orange groves all over Florida. They've been replaced by suburban developments and housing developments. But
Mm.
they used to have a very specific hybridized citrus, a type of orange, which I'd never heard of before. And so I can't remember what it was called. Sunburst or some kind of fancy orange variety that used to become ripe and readily available in the markets in February. February. So you've got people going around saying that you should only eat seasonally. Well, you know how hard it is to eat seasonally when you're in Inuit in Alaska, or
Mm.
even like, I know there's like I'm trying to stick to the US, but I'm thinking of that Maasai tribe, which gets referenced in Africa a lot because they eat predominantly meat. They don't have the longest of lifespan. Their traditional diet doesn't have as long of a lifespan as compared to the Okinawan diet, because they're eating so much meat, and all that meat puts a demand on their digestive system. All the meat and lack of fresh fruits and vegetables puts a demand on the digestive system of the Inuits up in Alaska. So we have the opportunity today, because we have changed the world. We have the opportunity today to get fresh fruits and vegetables year round. You can get in season oranges in the middle of winter. They became ripe in Florida in February, whereas normally we think of them as a summer fruit. Yeah, they're a summer fruit the further away you get from the equator. So let's put fermented products in their place. They were used to get through the winter. Sauerkraut was utilized by sailors who didn't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables when they were working on a boat at sea, because it helped prevent things like scurvy. But when you have access to fresh fruits and vegetables year round, then suddenly you have access to food that is going to promote the healthy and the best bacteria in your gut. If you don't have access to that, if we wind up in a situation where we don't have transportation around the globe to get fresh fruits and vegetables, then yeah, we'll have to go back to these survival techniques. But they are survival techniques, because if you could give your body what it really wants all year round, what it really wants all year round is fresh fruits and vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
And if you need to survive, yes, go have that fermented cabbage. Go have those pickled cucumbers, because the alternative is what? You're not going to get your vitamin C, and if you don't get your vitamin C for too long, you're going to have scurvy and other problems. So does it have bacteria? Yes. But are those bacteria necessarily the probiotics we think they are? Not necessarily, because we're living beings. And yeah, vultures are also living beings, but vultures are interesting because they are of a different vibration and frequency than we are. They thrive off of rotting and dead things. We don't thrive in the same way off of rotting and dead things. We thrive most when we eat living things. If you eat a fruit off of a tree, while you're eating that freshly plucked pear or whatever it is, it's still alive. There's a different energy frequency of eating living things versus eating dead and rotting things. Can we live off of dead and rotting things? Clearly, the answer is yes. But does it allow our bodies to thrive in the way that it would prefer? No. We are not vultures. We are not scavengers. We have these big brains that allowed us to create food forests, and we've moved away from that. And if we make food forests properly, we can have fresh fruits and vegetables year round. We have these big brains that allowed us to create root cellars so that we can still have fresh vegetable. Usually root cellar is going to be a vegetable, but you can store squash in there too, which is technically a fruit, even though we treat it like a vegetable. I'm getting technical. But we have these big brains that allowed us to create things like root cellars so we can still have fresh fruits, sort of, and vegetables in the winter. We have these big brains that allowed us to figure out how to create these massive trade networks that used to cross continents even before we had trains, planes, and planes, and automobiles.
Automobiles.
Thanks. But we know this. We know this when we look at Native American artifacts and relics. You can find seashells from the Pacific coast all the way in the middle of the Great Plains. They were trading. That's one of the reasons why we know that so many of them unfortunately died when they got into contact with all the European diseases, is because they were trading so prolifically. So this idea of oh, who cares if it's in season on the other side of the world, you should eat what's local. No, no, if we weren't smart enough to figure out how to do that trading, our ancestors wouldn't have been trading. So I feel like there is certain ancestral practices that we need to realize were pure survival, like the fermentation. They're not necessarily the holy grail of probiotics that you think they are. But then we do have trading, which we've been doing ancestrally, and the ability to get fresh fruit and vegetables in the times of the year where they're not locally accessible. That is the tradition that we really need to carry on. I mean, look at the European royalty. They would eat fresh fruits and vegetables in the winter, and they would block the pores from getting it. They would they jack up the prices. It's greed and theft from the people who are doing the most work.
Yeah. And it's just, I think into saying like what you were saying about like again how people like to use examples for eating a certain kind of way like locally. That's like before, like you were saying, like before civilization became nomadic. Like people used to move everywhere, so that's how you used to get things. But then when people became stationary again, they still need to keep those lines moving. So it's just like I just feel like it's a cop out from using intelligence. Like people like to again like theorize about how we should be living when we came from like a caveman standpoint. Not when you're in the place of being able to be innovative and to think and to have consciousness and the ability to use your mind to think outside of things, to create things outside of what we already have. It's like, everything about what we're doing is telling us what's going on. Like we have artificial intelligence constantly being a earpiece in how we think and telling us about our world around us instead of us going out and creating it as we go. So it's just definitely a bigger conversation. You know, all these things that are happening. It's like at least I see the broader aspect of it. Like I see the zoomed out view of why things happen or how it's affecting everything on a much bigger scale. Something so minute as a person's individual choice. How that consequence is so weighs so much more on a bigger scale too.
Yeah, AI is has the potential to do the exact same thing that I was saying, that the big pharma, the companies that produce the pesticides are the same companies that produce the medications. I'm picking
Mm-hmm.
on Bayer because they're one of the worst. Uh, but AI is a reflection of the people who programmed it, and it has the ability to cut us off from knowledge. It AI doesn't know how to go out and forage for foods. AI forgets that wheat's not. You got people like my client eating pasta because it's inexpensive and she could make it last, and it is loaded with calories so that their
Yeah.
children keep going. Wheat wasn't traditionally a bad food. Wheat was a staple in Europe. If you didn't have wheat, you were going to starve through the winter. Just like in North America, it was corn, and in South and Central America, it might have been potatoes and also corn, and Okinawa's sweet potatoes, and Asia, it's rice, and so on and so forth. But wheat's not wheat and soy. Those are not local native products here in North America. But who cares? If you can find an environment where a certain food can thrive and that food is nutritionally beneficial, then we should have access to it.
Mm. Yeah. I think maybe as we progress, maybe we can start expanding the conversation to finding maybe like the solutions to these things. Because that's I think the one thing that I want to be able to bring awareness, enlightenment to myself to these things that are happening. But I don't want to just keep talking about the issue like I'm bitching about it. I want to actually start being more proactive with the opportunity that we had. Like what I'm saying, like the fact that we have the consciousness and awareness of these issues, if we can start now thinking towards how to solve them, then that can kind of lend the opportunity to be inspired by a higher power, by creation, to find an answer for a solution because it's being asked, how do we fix this? Instead of just talking about the issue constantly, we're not putting our energy towards solving it. So maybe again, through us being able to have these conversations, we'll be able to really like open ourselves up to something that can be in the way of that. You know, like I don't want to always be a nihilistic thing like humanity's on the downward spiral. It's like fuck, yeah, we definitely are, but there's only can only go up. You know, I don't want to keep going down. Let's try going up now.
Perfect. Okay, how I want to end our conversation today then will be to provide a solution in relation to our main topic, which has been probiotics. How
Mm-hmm.
do you get your gut microbiome back on track? Well, we do need to look to a degree to how our ancestors lived. Our ancestors almost always had a staple food. A staple food was in almost every single meal because it grew readily and it was high in both calories and at least somewhat nutrient dense. I like looking at Okinawan diet because it was both high in calories and high in nutrition. The problem with wheat is while it's high in calories, it is not particularly nutrient dense. So, if you want to cultivate a good microbiome, one thing that you need to recognize is diversity is not necessarily a good thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing either, but if you don't feed yourself to a degree approximately the same thing consistently, you're going to be feeding lots of different bacteria. And that's not necessarily the key to health. Let's say you had a sweet potato, just one sweet potato with every single dinner. If you could have one sweet potato of any variety, and you could even change the variety up, and let's say you don't like sweet potatoes, it could be a regular potato, not quite as calorie dense, but equally nutrient dense, just different nutrients. If you wanted to have one potato or one sweet potato, preferably steamed, because we're trying to keep as much of the nutrients in there as possible. And there have been studies. There have been studies where they tried to say that potatoes were not healthy. That has to do with how they were prepared. Are you deep frying your potatoes? You're not getting the nutrients that you want. That coating of grease is literally blocking the absorption of nutrients. That coating of grease is making your digestive system work harder because of just how complex grease is. So if you were to boil, but preferably steam your sweet or regular potatoes, and if you just had one every day for dinner, that would help. That repetition would help to regrow your microbiome. You don't need to take probiotics to do it. If you're going to take a probiotic pill every day for the rest of your life, why is it that big of a shift to have one potato or one sweet potato for dinner every day for the rest of your life? You can buy a 10-pound bag of potatoes when they're in season for $1, but usually they're around $5, at least where I am. You can't beat that. How much does a bottle of probiotics cost? I have no clue because I haven't bought them. But that's a real solution. You could eat one potato or one sweet potato every single day and try it for a few months and see how your digestion modifies, see how it changes. But that would be a real solution, because your physical digestion is going to be a reflection of your metaphysical digestion. If you're not absorbing your physical nutrients, how are you going to be able to absorb the metaphysical nutrients? You're not.
And yeah. So this part could be edited out if you wanted to stop recording it or whatever.